Now, remember when I used to do Uncle Mike's Story Corner? Well, I have a version of that in front of me now. It's rather brief, but it showed up at Huffington Post this morning. So let me get right to it. On a cold morning, 3 years, 9 months, and 22 days ago, the reporters in the daily press pool waiting outside Blair House for then President-elect Joe Biden heard jet turbines spin up. We saw through the trees the white-topped Sikorsky VH-60N helicopter carrying outgoing President Donald Trump lift off the South Lawn and head off toward Joint Base Andrews. That was exactly 2 weeks after Trump's coup attempt and the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol, in which some 140 police officers were injured and 5 officers and 4 Trump supporters ended up dead. His actions turned the nation's capital into an armed camp for weeks. A few hours after Trump's departure, as Biden's inaugural motorcade drove up Constitution Avenue, thousands of National Guard troops lined the roadway. They were not there for the ceremony. Their backs were turned toward the passing vehicle so as to better watch for the threats from pro-Trump militants. In the intervening 4 years, Trump came to face dozens of state and federal felony charges based on his attempt to remain in power after losing re-election. He literally tried to end American democracy because he was mad that he lost. Never mind the felonies he was charged with for refusing to turn over secret documents he took with him from the White House. Never mind the felony convictions for falsifying business records to hide a hush money payment to a porn star. Never mind the jury verdict finding that he had sexually abused, or in the common understanding, raped, per the judge for the case, a woman in a department store. Trump's betrayal of the Constitution and its foundational pillar, the sanctity of elections, in a rational world, would have been the end of him. Indeed, besides campaign events, the last time he was in Washington, D.C. was as a criminal defendant. But this morning, with hundreds of domestic and foreign press milling on the driveway outside the West Wing, Trump was back at Biden's invitation. Last week, a majority of American voters decided to give Trump another chance. And in a gesture to norms, decorum, and peaceful politics, Biden is giving Trump the transition of power that Trump denied him, which includes a cordial meeting at the White House. Biden said, shaking Trump's hand, quote, "We're looking forward to having a smooth transition." Trump replied, "Thank you very much." The transition, not just from one presidency to another, but from one set of norms toward a different one, is just beginning. During yesterday's press briefing, a Fox radio reporter actually asked Biden if he had apologized to Trump for calling Trump a threat to democracy. And in the background, there was the regular flow of new bombshells as Trump's nominees for high-level positions, Secretary of State, Director of National Intelligence, Attorney General, were announced one by one throughout the afternoon, each nominee more eyebrow-raising than the last. It is going to be a long 4 years. That's the little piece that showed up at HuffPost. I'm not sure who wrote it, but it was pretty much an encapsulation of what happened yesterday. I still am trying to recover from the video showing Joe Biden sitting 3 feet away from this monstrous, filthy Nazi fucking pig. And Biden, falling back into the traditions and disciplines of being a president and handing off power to the incoming president, sat there very gracious. Well, the orange vomit, I could just imagine, his makeup was on particularly heavy, which gave him a surreal appearance of a goddamn orange beast from some other dimension. And there was Pale Joe sitting next to him. But I had this thought that Trump sitting there, it was more of an illusion, not a thought. All of a sudden grew out of his back these great big fucking vampire wings, right? And around Trump's orange bloated face, all of a sudden 2 fangs emerged from his mouth. And he sat there with his little bitty hands clutched in his lap. All of a sudden, long, scaly fucking fingernails grew out of each finger. I couldn't help it. And no, I wasn't stoned. And again, it wasn't a visual. It was more of a mental, just a total non-visual hallucination. There sat this vampiric son of a bitch, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden there with his neck hanging out. Awful. Just awful. And I've said now for several days, and I don't want to push you into saying, Malloy, move on. Not from this mess, because this mess is going to be ongoing until Trump dies. And, I have a few, I don't know if I mentioned this the other day. I have been talking about how I don't think the military is going to allow this to go on. A Trump presidency. We have 60-plus days before he's to assume the role of president. And I keep thinking the military or the CIA, especially now, the CIA or the Secret Service, are one of the 3-lettered agencies within the U.S. government that I, in the past, have criticized vehemently for their actions against the American people. But there comes a time, right? There comes a time when you say, wait a second, am I sure I want to criticize that action? That's how I felt when Liz Cheney decided to become Kamala Harris's shadow. Because I hated her father. I hated Dick Cheney, the warmongering son of a bitch, the fucking invasive, murderous Dick Cheney. And I remember saying during the campaign a couple of times, I'm getting a little nervous with the Cheneys supporting Kamala Harris, and Kamala Harris being so welcome to that support. But that's post-mortem on the election. I'll just let that go. But my thought last night was this. When the CIA or, granted this is back in 1963, 1962 and 3, but when the CIA and or other government intelligence agencies who were still dedicated to global dominance by the United States. We had dominated the world after World War II. We had dominated the world with our invention of nuclear weapons. We had our asses kicked by the North Koreans and the Chinese in the Korea conflict. Vietnam hadn't started yet, not where you and I knew about it. But Kennedy at some point had decided that maybe U.S. foreign policy, this neoliberalism that was being jammed down the throats of just about every nation on the planet, might not be such a great idea. And the power in this country, this is just my own little bullshit theory, okay? But it is one I've thought about for over half a century now. So the powers that be, with the help of the mafia, no big surprise there, look at Trump. With the help of the mafia, who probably provided the actual assassins, plural, decided it was time for John Fitzgerald Kennedy to be offed, to be removed from the political scene. And so they killed him. They shot him dead at Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. And that was the end of that shit. And some theories have been put forward. Why did they want to get rid of him? Well, one of the theories was, and I don't know, I don't call this a conspiracy theory, I call it a very valid theory. Off the shore of Vietnam lies underneath the ocean billions of barrels of oil. Now, the Vietnamese at this point apparently have elected not to go after the oil that's lying out there. And maybe it just had to do with oil. How many wars, how many governments have we overthrown? How many people have the United States had assassinated over oil? The list is a fairly long one. But regardless of the motive, I have felt all these years that Kennedy was assassinated not by Lee Harvey Oswald, that he was the patsy. And I know that may place me in the upper ranks of conspiracy theorists. I'm sorry. I don't buy into all this other horse shit. But the assassination of Kennedy and then the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald and then the rather strange cancer death of Jack Ruby, and the circle was complete. So I wonder now, seeing what a threat this orange bastard is to American democracy. Now, to be clear, when I talk about American democracy, I'm talking about the elitist, out-of-control, billionaire-dominated bullshit that passes for American democracy right now. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about. And the people at the top of the food chain in this country may not want their little nest disturbed. They have done quite well, thank you very much. It doesn't make any difference if Barack Obama is president or Donald Trump is president the first time, because there were guardrails, or if Joe Biden is president, makes no difference. But now this egomaniacal, toxic narcissist, this psychotic fuck, thinks that he is going to dominate everything. And he has as his chief whisperer, it's no longer the little Nazi Jew Stephen Miller. Oh, he's going to wind up as the assistant director of some shit? I don't know. But the South African immigrant Elon Musk, who is going to want billions of government dollars in order to mount his little airplane to Mars. Space cadet Elon Musk. There he is, folks. So do you suppose that now there is a real threat? I don't think Kennedy was any threat to the power structure in this country. Jesus Christ. But Donald Trump is. Donald Trump is a threat to anything and everything that has any life in it, whether that life is used for good or used for, pardon the expression, ill-gotten gains. It doesn't make any difference. Trump is a threat to it because Trump is a greedy son of a bitch who wants everything. He's not one of the kids in the sandbox who would share with the toys. Give me, those are my toys. That's Trump. Hi, Truth Seekers. Mike Malloy here. You know, the Progressive Voices Network brings you commercial-free commentary from today's leading progressive radio hosts and pundits, like me, Mike Malloy, 24 hours a day. I'm not your typical old guy from the 80s or the 90s talk radio host, and Progressive Voices is not your typical talk radio network. It's a listener-supported nonprofit with no corporate control whatsoever over our broadcast. So hosts like me, Mike Malloy, are free to rant and scream and carry on about whatever we like. We're often controversial, but we're never boring. Weeknights, 9 p.m. in the East, 6 p.m. in the West on the Progressive Voices Network. Always progressive, always on. I'm Mike Malloy. Keep it lit.